Hello, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Healthy Project podcast. I am your host, Corey Dion Lewis. I have a special guest in the virtual building today, speaker, author, CEO of Motion Infusion. And I'll have her talk more about that. Laura Putnam. Hey, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, Corey. It's really nice to be here.
Yeah. So, let's just kind of start from the beginning. Tell us a little bit about yourself. And I know you started as a teacher, and so I'm really curious on how that transition went from being a teacher in the inner city to becoming, kind of a thought leader in the wellness space.
So in addition to being a teacher, I also have been what I like to characterize as a lifelong mover. I was a competitive gymnast. I was on the Stanford women's gymnastics team. I had a stint as a professional dancer, lots of teaching aerobics or personal training, sometimes on the side, sometimes full-time. And so that's always something that I've really carried with me. So I did the same as a teacher where even though I was teaching history, I looked for ways to incorporate movement into the classroom in a meaningful way. And I'm telling you, especially with some of these students that were harder to reach, when I would bring movement in, even if it was something as simple as we're going to have stations set up here, and we're going to move from one table to another.
Right.
My students were engaged in a way that they wouldn't have been otherwise. And so that experience was really an important part of my path to starting Motion Infusion, and Motion Infusion based on the premise that when we move, all of us, kids or adults, not only do we get healthier, but we get happier and we even get smarter. It's one of the best things that we can do for our brains. It's one of the best things that we can do to get more engaged in our lives and our learning. So that really has played a part in that. And then the other piece is, I still consider myself an educator. I'm a lifelong educator, and now the classroom has changed a little bit. I like to think of the workplace as school for adults. And just like school is a point of transformation for children and for adolescents, the same can be true for adults.
Absolutely. That's awesome. And just like kids now being more virtual with their school and trying to go through that, a lot of adults are virtual at home, working from home. How do you feel people can continue to keep your mission of being active and being engaged, but also being stuck in the house? How's that transition been?
It's hard. I mean, here I am talking to you from my bedroom here while my fiance is in the other room. And, we're all trying to navigate these new confusing pathways where
Absolutely.
Work and home have become blended like no other time. But, one of the best things that we can do is just to have walking meetings, and what used to be walking meetings face to face, we can now do those virtually. Or we can just stand up. We can move together virtually in terms of having a team-based stretch together on Zoom. All of these things, they sound kind of silly, but cumulatively, if we do this on a regular basis, it really can make a difference. And so in the work that I do, I really try to encourage people to do this as teams. And so that's one of the reasons why I work so closely with team leaders and helping them to understand the role that they play. And as a team leader, they can really bring this to their team.
Yeah. And I didn't really understand how important a team leader was to an organization at first, but really they are that middleman, between, the employees and those executives on, on the fourth floor or wherever. Like they are that middle person, I also don't think they understand how much, what big of a role they have, because maybe they just feel like they're just a part of the crew too, but they can make a lot of change within the organization if they use that power right.
It's so true. I often say to senior leaders, you're the ones who set the tone and you allocate resources, but to those team leaders, to those managers, you're the ones who actually give permission to your team members to engage with well-being. And so people are smart. They know that the person who's largely responsible for their chances for promotion is their manager, their direct supervisor. So they're going to follow along with whatever is set by that team leader. So it's so interesting. I think that you're absolutely right, though. I think a lot of team leaders and managers just aren't aware of how important their role is. And when I share with them statistics, like, for example, Gallup research shows that the manager alone likely accounts for up to 70% of the variance of their team members' engagement, both with their work as well as their well-being, then managers start to get that. But also when I share with them examples of here's what other managers have done to become these multipliers of well-being for their team members. And so this is how you can do the same. But I've had managers say things to me, like after one of these managers on the move workshops, like, oh my gosh, I always thought that if I participated with my team members that, that I was intruding. And now I see that actually they're really counting on me to be in there with them, making the effort. And
right.
And it doesn't have to be so complicated. All I have to do is do, speak, and create. I got to do it myself, make the effort. I got to talk about it. And then I need to think about creating some team-based systems. It's pretty simple.
Right. Because they're the ones that make it okay. Because maybe they want to do something and they're like, but Susan isn't doing anything.
Right.
So I'm just going to just stay here and not say anything. But if the supervisor is engaged as well, it's inviting. I think that helps with the rapport and also with that employee engagement. Would you agree with that? Is that employee engagement at work?
Totally. And one time I was in a cafe in line waiting to get my latte, and I was behind a group of young women and overheard this conversation where they were talking about their managers. And, is their manager somebody who they can feel they're frowning if they get up and go for a run, or, another one sharing, oh, well, my manager is a runner and she goes for a run every day at lunchtime. So I know it's okay for me to get up from my desk. So, if you want engagement on your team, if you're a manager, you cannot rely on HR to do all the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
You got to do it yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So with so on that same, I guess, topic as engagement and getting people moving at work with the difficulties of the pandemic, what are some things that different groups and organizations can do to kind of keep that rapport up, and they can keep that culture of being active going, as they're at home right now?
Well, I think one is to recognize the extent to which each of us at work experiences culture is largely whatever we experience within our team. That's a really important aha for every team leader, to understand how much that little ecosystem that they create within their team is the culture that people experience. And so some of the things that I encourage these team leaders to think about, one is in regards specifically to movement, is to understand the benefits of movement beyond just it's going to help you to protect yourself against, boost your immune system. It's going to help you on a physical level, but it also is one of the most important things that you can do for your state of mind. So, for example, a study out of Duke University found that physical activity benefits us as much as Zoloft in terms of managing stress and anxiety and depression. It's also been shown to prime us to connect. So if you're a manager and you're wanting to build a higher level of rapport within your team, if you're wanting to kind of foster more cooperation and collaboration, movement is one of the most powerful ways to do that. So this is something that companies like LinkedIn have adopted for a long time, the practice of a walking meeting. And then it's also one of the best things that you can do to become more innovative. So for managers to know that the benefits go way beyond just physical is really important. But beyond that, I think in this challenging time for managers to also think about the things that they can do to move with their team, to build psychological safety within their team, and also to awaken compassion within their team. And that last piece of awakening compassion and people really feeling the sense like their team leader, their team coworkers all have their back is so important, especially right now. I mean, a recent study came out in early September showing that rates of depression have tripled since the onset of the pandemic. And, I'm experiencing this personally where there are now, the number has come up to 6 people within my social network who have died during this time.
Wow.
Not from the pandemic, but from the mental health collateral.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's deep. Mm-hmm. That is so deep. Mm-hmm. And I think people know on the surface, like we hear the studies or we see the articles, but it's almost like it's not real until it happens close to you. Like, or to somebody and it's like, oh, this is real. Like this is affecting this will affect people way longer, than the pandemic will be here. You know what I mean? This will affect people for a lifetime. And that goes into, you said something about, compassion, and it kind of sparked this question to me is, are employers looking at employee wellness programs or strategies the right way? Like from my experience, and mind you, I was in the corporate wellness space as a health coach. Like I wasn't, for a few years, I didn't have any say in anything. Like I just coached. But it seemed like it was just, hey, we'll throw these health coaches at you, and then you have to meet with the health coach, or you're going to pay these premiums. It almost seemed like wellness was, if you do it, then you'll get this in your HSA account. If you do it, then I'll give you this bonus. If you don't, you'll have to pay. It was the thought was, maybe in the marketing to the employee was like, hey, wellness this is great, but it never came off that way as like hey, regardless of how much it costs, we value what you do for us. This is what we're going to do for you while you're here. I don't know, for most of your day. you know what I mean? And like, are companies really valuing their employee wellness as something that is not just a spend for them or a cost, but a real value to the person? Not just take the employee out of it, but the person. Like they're here 8, 10, 12 hours a day or working. There was a statistic that I read a few weeks ago that since people have been working from home, their 8-hour day has stretched to longer days because work is just right there. You know what I mean? So productivity is up. So that's good for the company, but their employees are just working more because it's just there. So are they, I'm going to ask again, let me ask this question. Do you feel in companies are looking at wellness wrong?
Yes. Not all of them. But I think a lot of them are. And I think there's a fundamental disconnect between looking at wellness as a program versus a way of life. Mm-hmm. And you can have all the programs in the world and your workforce is not necessarily well. And conversely, you can have no programs and you may well have a very happy, healthy workforce. And the reason being that well-being is just a way of life. So I think that it has to be reframed as more as like, what can we do as an organization and team by team to enhance the quality of life for our team members, so that on a fundamental level, our workforce, the individuals that comprise our workforce, are healthier, they are happier, and they are closer to their version of me at my best because of where they work, as opposed to all of that in spite of where they work. And I think that for too many, it's a really heavy lift for them to be their best selves because of where they work, and that their place of work actually chips away at their overall quality of life and their sense of self. And frankly, many of those companies have that are some of the worst companies to work for, have extensive wellness programs. But meanwhile, often those companies that offer all of these wellness programs, or have the margarita machine and the ping pong tables and the mindfulness room and the programs, may well have a really toxic culture, and they tolerate that. I see that disconnect over and over and over and over again. And I just think that well-being really is, in its truest sense, is just basic things like I feel seen when I go to work, whether it's virtual or in person. I feel cared for by my coworkers and by my boss and by my senior leaders. I feel like my quality of life is enhanced when I'm at work. I feel like my boss appreciates me not just for what I do, but for who I am as a human being. It's amazing. Some of the most basic things that I talk to managers and leaders about are things like, do you call your team members by their names? And do you keep track of things like, their important dates in their lives, like their birthdays or their anniversaries, or are you asking about how their children are doing? These are all things that I just think are so critical, and but it just are overlooked.
Yeah, it's funny. That little stuff goes a long way. When I first started as my role as a health coach in my current and primary care setting, like the first week I was there, I crossed paths with the CEO, and he goes, "Oh, hey, Corey, I've never met this guy in my life." But it was like, that was so cool to me that I was like, I'm so excited that I'm here. Like the CEO knew my name. It felt like he was like some rock star that I just met, I'm like, oh my gosh, he knows who I am. And just that little thing, like, oh, hey, Corey, how you doing? How you liking the role so far? Glad you're here. Done.
And that did more for your well-being, I would imagine, than any program.
Absolutely.
A wellness program. So
absolutely.
Yeah. One of my favorite stories is I when I was writing Workplace Wellness That Works, I called up, I was in the part, kind of deep into the part about culture and how does culture interface with leveraging the workplace to promote better health and well-being for our workforce. So I called up Patagonia and I asked to speak with the wellness program manager or whoever it was. And the guy started laughing. He was like, we don't have a wellness program manager. We don't have a wellness program. But I guess you can talk with our team, the person who's like our kind of engagement person. But just the point being, in a company like Patagonia, well-being is just a way of life. And there's no need for a set-aside program. And, hopefully all of us in our roles as kind of in explicit roles as wellness people, hopefully there'll be no need for us at some point when it just starts to become a way of life for every organization.
Right. And that's my next question to Laura, where do you see employee wellness in the future? Like, what are some of those steps that we need to start taking to see more companies just taking on more of a what they are, just wellness, instead of needing these strategies and these programs to offer it to their employees?
Well, I mean, certainly in the age of COVID, in the age of post George Floyd, in this age of really coming to terms with our history that is steeped in systemic racism. Certainly, we're seeing a lot around, and I'm grateful for the fact that we're starting to see emerging between DEI, justice initiatives, and well-being, and how you can't have one without the other.
Right.
So that also changes the conversation around wellness, which is wellness is too often framed as a conversation around, quote, taking personal responsibility for your health and well-being. When we know, we look at something like systemic racism, or we look at the disproportionate impact that COVID has had on communities of color, we know that this transcends the take personal responsibility for your health and well-being conversation. Agreed. And instead, it has to be more of a conversation around what are the systems that we as a society have in place that's making it much easier for some to become their better selves and a whole lot harder for others. And how does that get repeated on every level? So whether it's community by community, neighborhood by neighborhood, company by company, or team by team. And so the conversation for every individual now becomes, okay, given the world I live in and the extent to which the systems within that either benefit me or don't, the place I work, the team I'm on, the boss that I work for, the school that my children go to, now, how can I become my best self? In other words, how do I respond to those? And then conversely, how can we collectively be thinking about how we can address those systems? So it really changes the conversation from you take personal responsibility to more about what can we collectively do, with the understanding that there is no me without you, and that the only way forward is together, certainly laid bare by COVID.
Amen to that. And it may be an uncomfortable conversation, but it's a necessary conversation, because there is a huge light shined on those differences, in this time. Like, we see it, and there's no, well, maybe, like, yeah, no, like we know. So it's going to take a lot of in companies or these people higher up to just sit down and have a really uncomfortable conversation. But some beautiful things can come from it, and to improve the wellness of everybody. Because if you improve the wellness of the employee, you improve the wellness of that employee's family and that employee's community. And it's just this snowball effect that it can be a very beautiful thing if we just take the time to do the hard work right now.
Yeah, I mean, we live in an individualistic society. Mm-hmm. Which is great in some ways, but we pay the price when it comes to our overall health and well-being. So case in point, we as a nation, as you know, as we all know, spend 2.5 times more per capita on healthcare costs than any other country in the world. So you'd think, gosh, we must be super healthy. But of course we're not.
Right.
Meanwhile, even though we're spending all this money on healthcare, only 3% of that total healthcare spend goes toward public health. In other words, we're spending all this money on healthcare that is designed for the individual, as opposed to healthcare that's going to make everybody healthier.
Right.
And so, so it is no wonder that we have framed better health and well-being as an individual pursuit, when in fact it has to be a collective one. So there's a lot that we can learn from other cultures, from other countries around the world. I mean, case in point, when I moved, I lived in a small village in Ghana for 7 months.
Oh, very cool.
And this was a number of years ago. And the first question that they asked me when I arrived was what day of the week I was born. Now, I don't know if you know what day of the week you're born.
I don't.
I didn't either.
Sunday. I want to say it was a Sunday.
Okay. So So then so I am a Friday baby. And so the reason why that's significant is that in Ghana, there's a tradition that you are not given your individualized Christian name until you are 2 weeks old. And during that 2-week period, you are only known by your day of the week name.
Huh.
So in your case, you would have been known only as Kwesi for those 2 weeks. And then you would be given the name Corey when you were 2 weeks old. In my case, it would be Efwa. But what ends up happening is that people end up using their day of the week name more often than their individual Christian name. So imagine, if you will, a community in which there are effectively 7 names for boys and men and 7 names for girls and women. And the reason why that's so significant is that what matters more is that you establish how you are part of a community as opposed to establishing your individual identity. And, not to say that it's not important to have an individual identity, but it's also so important that we create these structures, these rituals that really help us to feel like that we are part of something bigger.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that wellness needs a rebranding. Like we need like a brand manager on wellness right now. So, yeah. And I think to your point, Laura, is we are, even if you're not a social person, we are social beings. As we like being shut down, you urge to be with community as more now than ever. I love being a part, like talking and being engaging with people, but I've never felt that urge more now than when I can't do it than before. And it just goes to show that, wellness is just more than your BMI. Right. It's more than just, what your cholesterol is and how you can improve it, or, things like that. It's so much more. It's community. It's, how you're living, where you're working. There are a lot of different pieces that are not taken in consideration right now.
Yeah. I mean, if there is any silver bullet when it comes to our overall health and well-being, our longevity, our quality of life, it's connections with other people. And as Dean Ornish speaks about this, who is, as we all know, kind of leading mind around heart disease prevention, and he talks about how there is no single intervention that is more important, whether you're talking about diet, exercise, stress management, whatever it is, than connection. Love and connection is what matters most. And frankly, it's also what is the most powerful why behind why our life is worth living in the first place, and why we need to be exercising, why we need to be eating better, or doing all those other things that we're trying to promote in the health and wellness space. But connection is the primary reason. There's a gentleman by the name of Sergeant Briggs, who his job for 17 years was patrolling up and down Golden Gate Bridge to try to I wrote about it in my book, and it just is so meaningful to me. And I actually got to meet Kevin. So he spent 17 years trying to intervene, preventing potential jumpers from jumping. And so he described how what he would do anytime he came across someone who was getting ready to jump, that he would try to do anything he could to find the hook that would get them to change their mind, to create that connection. So first of all, he would try to create a connection between the two of them, so that person would even be willing to engage in a conversation with them, but then find that hook that was going to really keep them from jumping. And so one story he told was a gentleman, he had engaged in conversation for like 4 hours. And finally he found the hook, which was, he said, just so you know, if you jump, your children's chances of also committing suicide exponentially increases. And that was the hook. That was the hook, that this gentleman felt a connection with his children. And that's what kept him from, that's what saved him.
Wow. So finding that why, what was his reason for his reason for living?
Yep. This connection.
That's great. Laura, what keeps you so motivated and eager to keep doing the work that you're doing right now?
Well, certainly there's more, if you want your business case for wellness, here it is.
Right.
Or if you want your moral imperative for well-being for all, here it is. This country and our global community has been brought to its knees because of health. It's the foundation for everything. If without your health and your well-being, we have nothing. So it's just so fundamental. And again, it's more than health. It's about really all of us being able to be human. We are human beings above all. And I often think about Bronnie Ware, who is a hospice, or formerly was a hospice nurse. She worked with dying patients for 15 years. And over that 15-year period, she described how she heard the same dying regrets over and over and over again. And the top dying regret was, I wish I had had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the one that others expected of me. So that's something certainly that I have held true for myself, and not surprisingly, because of that, have had a very mixed career, from living and working in West Africa to a stint as a professional dancer in New York City, to being an urban public high school teacher, to living and working in a children's hospital in Mexico City, to spending a season skiing in Colorado and
Wow.
Vail, Colorado. But, I feel like that my work fundamentally is about helping people to live a life that is true to themselves, not the one that is expected of them.
Awesome. That's awesome. Laura, again, thank you so much for your time. If people wanted to get in contact with you and learn more about you, tell us, where can they connect with you?
The best way to connect with me is I'm very active on LinkedIn. So you can just find me under Laura Putnam. I'm also active on Instagram, Laura Putnam Author, as well as Twitter, which is at Motion Infusion. And then, of course, you can go to motioninfusion.com and get in touch with me that way as well.
Awesome. Well, again, Laura, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure. It was super nice. And everyone, thank you for listening to the Healthy Project podcast. I'll talk to you next time.